Greetings and welcome to FeedbackDef's series of album rankings. And today I'm going to be ranking the albums of none other than the godfathers of heavy metal, Black Sabbath. You know, there's some music that means so much to me, that it occupies a place in my life that's even beyond music. And I imagine you feel the same. You know, and it's kind of like, I can't imagine the world without this. I can't imagine life without this, right? Black Sabbath is, without question, one of those bands. I love this band so much and they mean so much to me. I can barely stand to be in a room when people are talking about them. It's like, I gotta get out of here. I don't argue or debate, get into it with people. I just shut up and either sit there and put up with it or just leave. And hopefully in the course of this ranking, you'll see why I feel that way. I am Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, and if you like what I'm laying down, like and subscribe, and most of all, weigh in with your perspective on where you rank stuff and other bands maybe that you want me to do these rankings for. Now, Black Sabbath need almost no introduction, but in case you are somewhat unfamiliar, there is no other band, probably ever, that is more synonymous with the term heavy metal than Black Sabbath. Now, the term had been around, you know, it's in that Steppenwolf song, Born to Be Wild, and there had been steps toward this heavier version of blues rock as done by groups like Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, etc., etc. So, it isn't exactly accurate to say that Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. However, as I argue in a piece that I wrote for Paste magazine, linked in the show notes, they are the first band to fully realize it, I would say. And it's not an exaggeration to say that there are bands, many of them, and entire genres of music, subgenres of heavy metal, that would not exist if it weren't for Black Sabbath. So they start out as a six-piece under the name the Polka Tulk Blues Band in the late 60s, 1968 to be precise. Their lineup at the time includes slide guitar player Jimmy Phillips and, believe it or not, a sax player named Alan Clark. Along the way, they decide to just trim it down to a four-piece without Phillips and Clark, and they do this in this kind of sneaky, funny way where they break the band up and reform as a four-piece, so they don't break up at all. They just don't have the nerve to actually fire the other two players. In there somewhere, they change their name to Earth before settling on Black Sabbath, and the rest, as they say, is history. Initially, they start out with a psychedelic twist on blues rock, with elements of jazz in it as well. And then eventually they start to hit on this other formula where guitarist Tony Iommi plays tritones, which is like the devil's interval. It's power chord with a diminished fifth that sounds really, really, really ominous and evil, especially back in 1969, 70, when these guys were first starting to do this. I cannot put into words how massive of an imprint this band has had. There's basically nothing that came after them is possible without what they did, okay? On the other hand, I think it's almost unfair to simply describe this band in terms of heavy metal. They did so much beyond the parameters of what we think of as heavy metal, particularly in their classic lineup, which consisted of singer Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, who I mentioned on guitar, bassist Geezer Butler, and drummer Bill Ward. I got to review the 2022 reissue of Sabotage, and then the last piece I ever wrote for them was a love letter to one of Black Sabbath's albums, which I won't get into yet. I don't want to spoil it, but I just want to read a couple of points I made there. It's difficult to conceive from today's perspective, but hearing Black Sabbath for the first time in the early 1970s had to have been an earth-shattering experience, particularly for listeners still in the adolescent throes of music discovery. We know this because dozens of them, who went on to form famous bands, have expressed a reverence so devout it's as if Black Sabbath's music defines who they are at the core of their being. Although fellow figureheads like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Alice Cooper, and even Funkadelic helped sow the seeds of what would eventually come to be known as heavy metal, Sabbath were indisputably the first to bring those seeds to fruition. I don't know about indisputably. If you feel like disputing it, I want to hear you out by all means. But I go on. At the time, there was simply no precedent for the dense, ominous twist that Sabbath put on the rock template. And it's no exaggeration to describe the Birmingham, England Quartet's self-titled debut in terms of a Big Bang scale event that birthed a new musical universe. By the same token, the band's work can have just as profound an impact on one's musical perspective in the present day, even with multiple generations of musicians having built on that initial foundation. Much like Beatles-inspired harmonies can be found everywhere in pop music, the influence of guitarist Tony Iommi's riffing style is so pervasive that it's become a kind of public domain library to draw from. Without Iommi, entire movements like stoner rock, sludge, and doom metal never have a basis to form. Oddly, though, scores of bands who owe their existence to Black Sabbath have focused only on the band's most superficial qualities. With countless Sabbath covers attempted by everyone from Charles Bradley to Cannibal Corpse, it's telling that so many marquee hard rock acts, Soundgarden, Caius, Faith No More, Metallica, Pantera, White Zombie, Al Jorgensen, Weezer, etc., haven't come close to capturing the nuance or dynamics of the originals, which indicates that there's something about Black Sabbath that's impossible to pin down, much less replicate. And anyone who sees the band according to a confining definition of metal is in for a world of surprise. For simplicity's sake, Black Sabbath's classic era work with original vocalist Ozzy Osbourne divides into two distinct periods. A 4-album block consisting mainly of the metallic, funereal style the band is celebrated for, and another 4-album block of more exploratory material that showcases Sabbath stretching out in myriad directions. That said, the first 4 albums can hardly be considered one-dimensional affairs. At points, Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Master of Reality, and Volume 4 all deviate sharply from the forbidding ambience that so impressed the band's musical airs. And even when those albums stick to a uniform approach, they contain an enormous amount of texture. Not to mention residual traces of the band's roots in blues, psychedelia, and jazz, along with splashes of hippie flower power sentiment that add yet more contours to the music. Conversely, it's in the second phase of the Ozzy era where we find some of the most crushingly heavy Sabbath tracks. Okay, so I find that even the people who love this band don't necessarily focus on the full frequency spectrum of what they were. And I also find that so many bands after them have covered their tunes, and for the most part, I find that none of them capture the intangibles that made Black Sabbath what they were. And a lot like the Beatles, Black Sabbath has become its own musical vocabulary that people feel very free to just borrow from, right? Like in Beatles harmonies and Beach Boys type harmonies and things like that. People will sort of launch into that in their music without feeling like they're ripping off the Beatles. It's a very similar thing with Black Sabbath. I mean, there are entire bands that have molded their entire identity on what Black Sabbath did, but I almost always think it's a very, very limited representation. So there's very few of those bands that I feel like, oh wow, they did it really well. They've taken this a step further and they've done this in an artful way. All right. Black Sabbath has had a convoluted history. Like I said, there's the classic lineup. I am only going to do their records up to 1983. The reason being, not because I don't want to acknowledge everything that came after that. It's because I need to go back and really sit with the Tony Martin era and the record they did with Glenn Hughes. I want to go and really sit with the subsequent records like the Heaven and Hell, Ronnie Dio stuff they did interspersed post 1983, and the fans will know what I'm talking about here if that sounds a little too in the weeds for everybody else. I want to go and really sit with the Ray Gillan version, like the demos of Eternal Idol. I want to sit with all that. And I feel like the chaos that sort of set on with this band in terms of lineup shifts and reunions, there's 2 different reunions going sort of concurrently, interspersed with Tony Martin coming in and out. So when I think of Black Sabbath, like a band that gets like a pillar, a column in the Grecian temple of rock, I think up to 1983. But I do want to give that the rest of the catalog its due in another video. Okay, so just a little bit more history. Ozzy Osbourne leaves Black Sabbath in 1977, returns again in time to do one last album with the band in 1978, leaves. They then try to get him back to do the follow-up to that record, falls through. In the meantime, Tony Iommi is putting together something that he is envisioning as a solo project and recruits Ronnie James Dio, who had just been recently let go from Rainbow, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, so Ritchie Blackmore's post-Deep Purple band. And that eventually sort of recoalesces into Black Sabbath. That only lasts for 2 studio albums, which I'll get into. And then they bring Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, and that only lasts 1 record. And then from there, it's the chaos and all the different lineup changes that I was talking about. Okay. At the bottom of my ranking of this period, 1970 to 83, or 69, if we're really being technical, I'm going to go with an album that really should rank higher and would be not at the top of the list, but pretty damn close, if only. I'm going to go with Heaven and Hell, the first album with Ronnie James Dio, with original drummer Bill Ward still in the band at this point. If I responded to this whole record the way I do to the first 2 songs and the last 2 songs, this would be way higher on my list. I don't think there's anything wrong with the stuff in the middle. It just so happens I don't feel as much for it. But man, this album kicks off. They sound completely reinvigorated, and it just sounds like they're soaring towards something really, really, really majestic and wonderful. And for whatever reason, it just doesn't hold together for the whole record for me. I want to love this record, the whole thing, as much as I do the beginning and the end. It just so happens it doesn't quite lift me up in the middle. Otherwise, this would be way higher. Next, I'm going to go with Born Again, the one and only album they did with Ian Gillan. At this point, Bill Ward has briefly re-returned to the band just to record this record. He doesn't tour with them after this. This is the tour with the infamous Stonehenge stage set that they had that was too big to fit into most venues. It was 3 times the size of the actual Stonehenge. The band have talked about it, and Ian Gillan and Geezer Butler have laughed a ton about this. I think this album is a lot of fun. I think on paper, the merger of Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, the Jesus Christ Superstar singer in Black Sabbath, on paper works really well. I just think this album's a lot of fun. They have talked about how they think it's murky sounding, and Ian Gillan has said, when I saw the cover, the famous cover with that demon baby, he said, when I saw the cover, I wanted to puke, and then I heard it, and I wanted to puke again. He said that the final mix did not match what he was hearing in the control room in the studio, like the rough mixes they had, so he would love to see it re-released with a new mix. I don't really have a problem with this mix at all. I think it's part of the personality and charm of the record. I really, really like it. I have distinct memories for anyone who's from the New York City tri-state area. There was a UHF band channel named U68 that used to show hard rock and heavy metal videos, and they would show half-hour blocks that were like the same half-hour block. Like once you saw the first 3 videos or so, you knew which block you were getting if you were a repeat watcher. And they showed the videos for Trashed and Zero the Hero. I have a soft spot for this record. It has a special place in my heart, and so I'm ranking it here. Next, I'm going to go with an album I initially did not take to. I'm talking about Live Evil, the double live album that they did with Ronnie James Dio. I have a whole video about this where I talk about this record and Ronnie Dio's book and his time in Sabbath and the documentary on him, because this was released or re-released in deluxe form a couple years back, and it was released with a new mix. So I went back and listened to the original mix, and I must say it has really grown on me. I am not a fan of when Ronnie Dio does the classic Ozzy era material live. For some reason, that does not click with me. And it's a really, really obvious selection of songs too. But everything that he's drawing from his time in the band, I just think sounds really, really, really more grand and more dramatic on this record. I actually really, really like the original mix. So they reissued it with the original mix and the new mix together, so you can have both. And although it's not perfect, like the crowd sounds like it's not there, it's like so far away, it's like they're on a sound stage. I have really, really come to like this record. There's a really cool moment where the Sign of the Southern Cross, which is this brooding, what would later come to be known as like doom metal, really dramatic in its sense of drama. It's almost operatic. That song kind of comes in and out. It's sort of interpolated, or it interpolates another tune. And I think that's really, really cool. Like if you were at the show or listening to the record for the first time, you go, oh, wow, that's cool. That song is back. And the thing that really stands out for me is how nicely Vinny Appice's drums are mixed. Vinny Appice replaced Bill Ward and has stuck with Dio pretty much, from that point onward for the rest of Dio's career and life, really, in and out of Black Sabbath and in Dio. And it gave me a new appreciation for his drumming. I'm a humongous Bill Ward fan. I think Bill Ward was more than quote unquote just a drummer. I don't disparage the role of drummers at all. I think drummers are supremely important. So there is no such thing in my mind as just a drummer. However, he was a true artist on the drums. He was a real musician and visionary. I think his sense of like where to place his snare hits, his hi-hat patterns, so much about his drumming was just so deep. I thought that Vinny Appice from Bill Ward is a more straight ahead, like American style rock drummer, not as inventive, but I feel he really shines on this recording. Okay, next I'm going to go with the one album from the classic period that I always have cataloged in my mind as, I don't like that record. But I actually kind of do. Every time I sit down and listen to it, I go, oh no, actually I do like this album. But it's sort of with reservation. I'm going to go with Technical Ecstasy from 1976. This is the penultimate record with Ozzy, the second to last. I actually really like these songs for the most part. There's something about this mix that feels, it's impenetrable to my ear for some reason. And this was reissued in deluxe form with a new mix by Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree. He's done tons of new mixes and surround mixes. Lots of bands like Yes and even Tears for Fears. He's a new mix specialist who is very, very highly regarded. And I have to say, the details that he brought out perk me up. And I go, wow, I didn't notice the way that bass line moves or the way that keyboard part gurgles. But then I start sort of referencing the original mix in my head, and then I get caught between the two. I do like this album. There are several tunes on here I really, really, really like, actually. Dirty Women is one of them. Backstreet Kids, You Won't Change Me. Told you once about your friends and neighbors. It's All Right, which was sung by Bill Ward. Beautiful song. But for some reason, I always kind of hesitate when I think about this album. Then when I put it on, I'm like, no, I like it. All right, so next, I'm going to go with Mob Rules, which is the second album from the Ronnie James Dio era. It's the first one I got, like I said. I really like how this band transitioned from the 70s into the 80s, at least the early 80s. I'm pretty sure, almost positive, the first thing I ever heard by them was the song Mob Rules, the slightly alternate version they did for the movie, the animated film Heavy Metal, which used to show all the time on HBO when I was a kid, and I watched it and I absorbed all the songs. I have a video about that as well, about how much that soundtrack means to me. This song is a highlight of that soundtrack. It's really the only truly heavy metal song on the whole thing. And I just think this album is really, really thrilling, really, really solid. It's got a confidence and a swagger to it that I find really, 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 it just lights me up. There are some really, really, really powerful moments. This album would rank higher for me, except that it doesn't have the variation that pretty much everything from the Ozzy era does have. And that's the only reason why it's this low. Otherwise, I love this record. It has a really, really, really special place for me. And I think it holds up very, very well. I like I said, I really like the way they were advancing into early 80s rock style production before the 80s got ridiculous. Okay, next I'm going to go with an album that I really have no problem with, but it ranks pretty low. I would almost put Mob Rules above this album, but in my mind, I still consider this a better album. Like if I were recording a band and they put out Mob Rules and then they put out this, I would feel like this is a stronger record. I'm not saying better objectively, I'm saying better in my mind. I almost like Mob Rules more. I think this other album is more sturdily constructed. I'm talking about Paranoid, the album that the casual fan on the street knows. The title track is their most well-known song, easily by far. I don't really even have an issue with that song. I listen to it, I go, wow, I think it's produced in a really interesting way. I think it has a really interesting sort of sonic, spatial quality to it. There's overplayed songs that became concert staples of theirs, War Pigs and Iron Man, that I think are really, really powerful, that I don't get sick of at all. And yet I almost never reach for this album. And this is certainly not the record that I would point to if someone's like, oh, I want to get into Black Sabbath, where do I start? I would not give them this for a couple of reasons. One, although I think it's interesting that they do this sort of fuzz rock kind of thing, right? They're not the only band that was doing this by any means. There were other bands, Blue Cheer and MC5 and, bands like that. But it's just been so overdone. And I know it's not fair to do it just for this aspect of what they did, because everything else they did has been overdone by imitators as well. But I don't find this album as like appealing on like a rock level, like a rock and roll level as I do their first album. And it's not as crushingly heavy as everything that starts to come right after this album, even though there are some amazing tunes on here, amazingly dark moments, Hand of Doom, Rat Salad. It's just kind of like a fuzz rock record, and I'm a little burnt on that sound. It's not what I most associate with them, even though I don't really have any issue with these songs. I love War Pigs. I wish they had repeated the parts at the beginning and the heavy part. I wish they had repeated that or brought that back somehow, and they don't. And I'm always like, man, come on. I want more of that. Okay, next I'm going to go with their self-titled debut from 1970. We're getting now into the part of their discography that I have like no reservations about, really. I think this album, unlike what I just said about Paranoid, retains some of the psychedelia quality that they came into this with and marries it with this heavier, more foreboding sound in a way that I just think is really, really beautiful. Songs like Behind the Wall of Sleep and Wasp, like I find this album very, very, very uplifting, actually. I don't find it like dark and doomy. It has a buoyancy to it for me, and it's attached to some memories of just being young and really feeling giddy about life in a way that I just love. And, as far as debuts go, wow, what a statement to make, right? And boy, if you were one of those people to have heard this in real time, you're lucky. Okay, so these next two albums are really hard for me to rank. They're almost completely neck and neck. I am going to go next. I'm going to give the slight edge to one of them. I'm going to go next with Volume 4. This album is where I think they really start to stretch out or show hints of stretching out. I mean, they were doing it all along, right? Even on Paranoid, there's Planet Caravan. There's two really mellow songs that sound like almost like Santana on Paranoid, right? So that's really early. Here they're doing stuff like Laguna Sunrise and the song Changes. And there's this extra quality. There's this like something I can't quite put my finger on, but there's a texture to the heaviness to songs like Snowblind and Cornucopia. There's almost like this Renaissance medieval kind of twist to them. It's almost like they're still conjoined at the hip with Jethro Tull in some ways, right? There's this almost pastoral quality that I think undergirds the heaviness in a way that has a lot of character and dimension that I absolutely love. So next, with the album that I almost ranked on the same level as Volume 4, but I'm going to give the slightest edge to, I'm going to go with Master of Reality. Now, what I said before about you're very lucky if you heard the debut album first. If you heard this album in 1971, when it was first released, when it was contemporary, I just cannot imagine having one's mind blown like that. This is fucking heavy, okay? Like, even by today's standards, there's stuff on here, Sweet Leaf, Into the Void, Lord of This World, that just sounds so, again, for lack of a better word, doomy. Not to mention Geezer Butler's lyrics, which, especially on this album, have this real sense of concern for the world, but it's charged with this idealism and hopefulness that's almost naive, except that it's aware of everything that's wrong. And that hopeful, kind of like romantic streak couples with the heaviness of the music in such a powerful way. I mean, it makes it heavier. There's a real sort of heart on your sleeve. There's something very human about the way Geezer's lyrics. There's a holdover from 60s idealism, but totally turned on its head in this really dour, like, oh my God, if we don't do something about the course we're on, all the children of today are children of the grave. But even as he's saying that, that song is like a vote of confidence at the same time. Like he believes in the spirit of what people will do if prodded to do the right thing. He believes in the kids and the youth, basically. As kind of hokey as that might sound, the way it comes across in the song, it's not hokey at all. It's a really, really, really galvanizing. And I haven't even talked about his amazing, I would say ingenious, counter-melodic, counter-rhythmic bass lines. That's like his signature thing. And you really, really hear it on this record. I mean, you hear it before this too. That's just such a essential component of his artistry. His approach to bass and lyrics all put together. Like if Tony Iommi is the engine of the band with the guitar parts and the riffs, and Ozzy is the front-facing, like, I guess literal voice of the band, and Bill Ward is the one who paints the backdrops in percussion. Like he's the one who gives the music like this wide-angle scope with his approach to the drums. Then Geezer Butler is the music's conscience. Such a creative person. Again, like I said about Bill Ward, he's an artist, not only on the bass, but he's bringing more than just bass playing, right? He's definitely not just doubling the guitar part. And all of these things lock together on this record beautifully in this incredibly graceful, powerful, hard-hitting, awesome, get lost in the grooves kind of way. Man, if you were a kid smoking pot in 1971 and you heard this for the first time, I just don't think your life would be the same. What a strong distillation of what this band's identity was at the time. What a strong statement. This is what we are. Next, I'm going to go with the live album Live at Last, which was not officially sanctioned by the band. It was released by their, I guess, former manager in 1980. Does this album have a murky sound? Yes. To me, it sounds like you're standing in the back of a theater, not even an arena, but a theater type venue, and the balcony wall goes about 20 feet out above your head, and the sound is sort of being smushed and coming towards you. The band sounds very far away. But after Mob Rules, this was my introduction to the Ozzy lineup, and talk about getting my mind blown. The guitar tone on this record is so magnificently heavy, much more so than the records. Songs like Cornucopia, Sweet Leaf also. A lot of those songs I heard for the first time here. And those are the versions that imprinted on me. Again, it is muddy sounding, but to me, this feels like I'm standing in the back of a concert hall, just getting pummeled. And the band is in peak form. They sound like they're on fire. Those hi-hat hits, accents on Sweet Leaf. I mean, my God, to me, these are the definitive versions. This was re-released twice, actually, much of this same recording, because this is from two different shows in 1973. Much of this stuff was re-released as Past Lives, as part of the Past Lives set, and then it was re-released as part of the Deluxe Volume 4, like complete concert, but the mixes are different on those than they are on this. I am so partial to this. Funnily enough, I traded my cassette of Mob Rules, as much as I love that record, I traded that for this. A friend of mine on my block in the Bronx, this older guy named Danny, had this album, and he goes, I don't like it, man. It's like cemetery music. That's what he described this as. And he was into some heavy stuff himself. He's the one who introduced me to Blue Oyster Cult, by the way. So it's not that it was like too heavy for him. He just didn't like the vibe, I guess. Man, I heard it. That first squall of feedback, I was hooked. So next, I'm going to go with, for the number 2 position, I really can't pick between these two. These two albums are tied for number 2 for me. I'm going to go with Never Say Die and Sabotage. Sabotage has risen very high over the years. I liked it a lot as a teenager when I bought it in the 80s on vinyl. And I remembered it as being like adventurous, but really abrasive and meandering and unfocused. And my impression of it was like, oh, I wonder if that's what like a bad Robitussin trip feels like. I was like, that's what musically what this feels like. It just left a kind of like a film, a vibe that I was just like, yeah, this feels a little almost like musical heartburn. So I got the deluxe reissue and I was like, whoa, I didn't remember how much I love this album. It's dark. It's from a really period of turmoil in the band where they're losing their manager and they're getting sued, which, I mean, I cannot believe these people were able to pull this off. It's chaotic. The songs, there's a bunch of like longer tunes that just kind of drift into different spaces than where they started. But man, it's practically a masterpiece. I mean, pretty much. It's very, very out there and just kind of freak flag flying high on this record and crushingly heavy in spots, really moody, lots of atmosphere. There's vibes here and studio trickery and yet a lot of really interesting tangents. And the fact that they could hold this all together into a record that holds up is practically miraculous. And just goes to show these guys are like dripping with inspiration. They're just oozing with inspiration. It's just sparking off them as fucked up of a state as they're in with drugs and their management issue, legal issues and all that stuff, having to come up with material in whatever state of disrepair they're in, and they're still pulling this off. Wow. Now, tied with this, an album that I loved right off the bat is Never Say Die. This is the band's by far most far-reaching album. There is a moment, and if you dread this term, brace yourself, there is jazz fusion on this record. But unlike Spinal Tap, it's convincing. A couple of these guys, well, actually 3 of the 4 of them, that being Bill Ward, Geezer, and Tony, really, really, really wanted to explore this kind of music. And it fucking shows on here. There's a piano, I don't want to call it a ballad because that almost doesn't dignify what this song is. There's this sublime, gorgeous piece of music called Over to You that sounds like piano rain falling notes from the sky. And it's really affecting and really, really, really moving. There's a lot on here. Now, the title track is super fucking heavy. There's a, what was it called? Breaking the Chain or Swinging the Chain. Super, super heavy. There's a song called Johnny Blade. Also very, very, very heavy. Very doomy, again, that word, but mixed with these other moments. Air Dance, Over to You. The keyboards, I also got to say, the production, very immediate. It sounds like you're right on stage with the band in a rehearsal. Like you're right in the room. They're like right there, but the fidelity is really, really high. And it's not flat. It's 3-dimensional. So it's huge sounding, but you're right there, huge but intimate and clear and forceful and colorful. All of these things, amazing record. What a note to go out on with Ozzy, my goodness. Okay, so for my all-time favorite Black Sabbath album, I'm going to go with the one and only Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. As I mentioned, my final piece for Paste Magazine is titled A Love Letter to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. This published on the 50th anniversary right around then in December of 2023. And, you know, there are moments that are so powerful for you as a young person just discovering music that just sear into your being. And for me, there's a section of a tune on here called The National Acrobats that, well, I'll read to you from this piece. Sometime in the 90s, I came across an interview with Page Hamilton, founder and bandleader of the alt-metal quartet Helmet, where he recalled the first time he heard Aerosmith's Back in the Saddle as an adolescent. Hamilton described being so swept away by the music that he felt like he was being lifted out of his body. Black Sabbath wasn't the first music that gave me that kind of feeling, but their song A National Acrobat, the second track on their 1973 opus Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, remains one of the most powerful examples I've ever come across. To this day, even thinking about the extended middle section of that song sends chills rolling up my body. After so many pummeling riffs, Black Sabbath had decided to take a decisive step out on a limb, only to take flight and reach for the stars. When Osbourne sings, "Don't believe the life you have will be the only one," his voice echo trails across a cosmos of sound bathed in the shimmering wash of Iommi's circular guitar figure. Here, Iommi dials down the beefy distortion in favor of a more resplendent sheen of wah and fuzz. I'm not sure what it is about this passage, but it always feels like being spoken to from something deep within the heart of the universe, something unseen and unknowable. In fact, even after all these years, I have no idea what is being communicated. I just know that it feels like it's there, speaking, for lack of a better word, through sound. Since first hearing A National Acrobat around the age of 12, I've never had the slightest clue what Geezer Butler's lyrics were supposed to mean. It's never mattered. I didn't know until sitting down to write this piece that Butler wrote the lyrics from the point of view of a spirit that doesn't get incarnated into earthly form because the child it was going to become never gets conceived. Looking over the words now, of course that makes sense. And the idea of children's souls circling their potential parents before they're born has a beautiful resonance. But I can assure you, I wasn't giving much attention to such matters as a 12-year-old. I'm honestly not even sure if the line, "the unborn child that never was conceived," ever consciously registered with me at all. I've also never noticed until now that the song doesn't contain a chorus. The band gives us 2 verses, and then without fail, I find myself in another realm. In all of rock and roll, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more romantic or imaginative lyricist than Butler. And if you listen only at a surface level, his hippie-like musings can be easily obscured behind the band's awe-inspiring wall of sound. But the place this song takes me is a place beyond Butler's narrative. I can only experience it as a fragmented prism of images that spark intense feelings words can't describe. In truth, it's the combination of sounds that gets me. The song is mixed to convey a convincing sense of the otherworldly, but I always hear something almost supernatural in the playing too. So that's just that song. But overall, I have to say, while I say Never Say Die is their most far-reaching, I feel like this is the album where they really stride into all of that ground. Okay, now we're opening the floodgate to all of our ideas. There's so much on here, so many different flavors that they pull off with such confidence, such assurance, such like, man, we are claiming all of this. All of music is our oyster to draw from, and it's just sublime and wonderful. It is a monumental record. I close my review by saying this. A half-century after its release, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath stands as one of the most monumental achievements in a most monumental career. As I see it, it still towers over the landscape of heavy metal and of rock more generally. I invite you to lose yourself in its many wonders. And that, folks, is my Black Sabbath album ranking. Let me know what you think in the comments, where you rank these records, where you rank these different periods. Are you partial to the stuff that I didn't cover? Let me know. And again, if you like what I'm laying down, please do hit that like and subscribe button. Otherwise, thank you for hanging with me. For FeedbackDef, I am Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, lifelong Black Sabbath fan. Over and out.